All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get the program started. So again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And welcome to our virtual program in conversation with Stephen Towns and Kilolo Luckett. I'm Dr. Erica Knuckles, the Director of Learning, Engagement, and Partnerships at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art. And I would like to begin the program with a moment of acknowledgements. The Westmoreland Museum of American Art is situated upon the traditional lands of the Adena, Hopewell, Monongahela, Osage, Delaware, Shawnee, and Seneca Cayuga peoples. We honor all of the indigenous nations and their land with great gratitude. We also acknowledge the enslaved Africans whose labor built this country during the colonial era and beyond. As a museum, we use the power of art to explore and reveal the complexity of American history in an effort to create a more just and equitable society. Now, before we get the conversation going, since this is a Zoom webinar, everyone but our panelists will be muted, but please feel free to post your comments and questions in the chat throughout the program, and I will share them with our presenters as we go along. To get the chat going, we are curious, where are you joining us from this evening? And why are you attending this program today? So feel free to post in the chat as I continue with my introductions. I want to now acknowledge that the exhibition, Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance, and its programming is generously supported by Eden Hall Foundation, the Heinz Endowments, the Hillman Exhibition Fund of the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, Arts, Equity, and Education Fund, the National Endowment for the Arts, and DeBuck Gallery. Additional funding provided in part by a grant from the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Bureau of Recreation and Conservation, Environmental Stewardship Fund, administered by the Rivers of Steel Heritage Corporation. And now I want to welcome our presenters. Kilolo Luckett is a Pittsburgh-based art historian and curator. With over 20 years of experience in arts administration and cultural production, she is committed to elevating the voices of underrepresented visual artists, specifically women and Black and Brown artists. Luckett is founding executive director and chief curator of the recently launched Alma Lewis, named after abstract artists Alma Thomas and Norman Lewis, an experimental contemporary art platform for critical thinking, dialogue, and creative expression dedicated to Black culture. And now to welcome artist Stephen Towns. Stephen Towns is a painter and fiber artist whose work explores how American history influences contemporary society. Originally from South Carolina, Towns received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting from the University of South Carolina. His work has been exhibited in several venues, including the National Museum of African American History, Baltimore Museum of Art, the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, Art and Practice, York College of Pennsylvania, and is in the private collection of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, Flint Institute of Arts, Petrucci Family Foundation, Art and Practice, and private collections nationally and abroad. I'm now going to start the program with a short video. So let me share my screen and we will get to the video.
I would describe the work in Declaration and Resistance as a labor of love. I began working on this exhibition before the COVID-19 pandemic. Going through COVID and experiencing some of the things that were happening at that time period, I wanted to transform the exhibition into more of a celebratory aspect of labor and the people who are laborers. Because I remember working in retail stores, being a waiter, working in restaurants. Like, I felt down at times and I felt defeated. But there were times when I felt proud of what I was doing. And so I wanted to take those moments of my pride in myself and use that glimmer and that spark to create the work that I've made for this show. Becoming a quilter has sort of shaped how I think of my paintings. My work was always about assemblage and construction and layers upon layers upon layers. And then when I started quilting, it made me see things in a totally different light. Some of the pieces that you see looked completely different at one point, and we spent a lot of time working on it, and then I felt like, well, this just is not speaking right now. And so I've had to cut out whole portions of a quilt and redo it just because it didn't tell the story that I needed to. And so even though I had sketches and I had an idea of what I see in my head, it's always different than what is fully fleshed out. And a lot of times what comes out is much better than what I had in my head.
Hi, Kilolo.
Good evening, Stephen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for watching us today.
Yes, good evening, everybody. And thank you, Erica and Hannah. And that video, that short promo that you saw was made by filmmaker and Jamie and Jai. So thank you very much for that. And you can see the documentary on Stephen at the Westmoreland, and then we'll be having it online soon, I hope, if it's not online already. So, but anyway, welcome everybody. You're in for a treat. This has just been a joy to be working with Stephen the past 2.5 years. So excuse me, as I always say to Stephen, if I get a little emotional, because it's really been a labor of love, a journey of just learning more about myself through Stephen's work and my curatorial practice. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take you through a little presentation of some of the work and situate you inside the actual exhibition. And then Stephen's going to tell you about his work, and then we'll wrap up and do a little Q&A. All right.
Perfect.
I'm going to share my screen. And can everybody see this? All righty. So welcome to Stephentown's Declaration and Resistance. It's on view at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art through May 8th. And what you're seeing here is the title painting called I Am the Glory that Stephen did. And then right behind it, it's Birth of a Nation, which is Stephen's first quilt he ever made in 2014. And Stephen has said that, you know, he is a self-taught quilt maker, which is remarkable, and that you have all of these beautiful quilts in the show, which is really wonderful to see, kind of like your trajectory from almost a decade ago to now. And then here we have in the space, this triptych here is the Brewster Hospital nurses. And what I did as far as laying out the show is I kind of broke it up into kind of 6 different sections. I wanted to kind of frame different bodies of work, but also they're all in conversation. So not only one painting or quilt beside one another, but also having these dialogues across the gallery as well. And so with the Brewster hospital nurses, they are part of this section called the Healers and the Guardians. And these are hospital nurses, healthcare workers, and also people in the military who helped fight for the Union and protected us. These are just some people looking at Stephen's work. You can see also we had two colors that we wanted to highlight with the show, and blackberry and the billiard green, which I just feel like really popped and really helped amplify Stephen's work even more. And then here you'll see the two works here, the two roses, the two paintings here, and then the lower one is the educators. And Stephen will be talking shortly about the coal miner series, 6 works, mixed media paintings that he did. And then these are 3 story quilts, the chain gang, the rice workers, and the fishermen. And mind you, Stephen did all of these work in the past 2 years, which is quite remarkable. And then we have on the left, this is We Will Be Our Own Leaders, and then Carolina Gold. And then an epilogue to Stephen Towns' Declaration of Resistance. I did a second show called End of an Illusion. And these works, I really wanted to put Stephen in a greater conversation of art history canon, and starting with Joshua Johnson, who is the first documented African-American painter, who dates back to the late 1700s. And this is his painting right beside Stephen's quilt, Special Child, which was made in 2016. And this is Joshua Johnson's portrait of a woman and her daughter. It's a portrait of Susanna Amos Yeo and daughter Mary Elizabeth. And this was made in 1809. And then right beside it is Carrie Mae Weems' series based on the kitchen table series. It's called Entitled Putting on Makeup. And this was made between 1990 and 1999. And then in the foreground here, you see Kara Walker's exquisite book called Freedom, a Fable. And this was made in 1997. And you'll see this relationship with these works. You have this older figure, a mother figure, interacting with a child. And for those that might know this, you have to remember that during slavery, enslaved people were prohibited from reading. So if you were reading, this was something that you could be, brutalized for. And so this is Nat Turner as a young child reading from a passage of the Bible, which is, I feel like, foretelling of the revolt that he's going to embark on later in his life. But I just wanted to show people that this epilogue is an extension to Stephen's newer body of work, and that people can see and enjoy existing works by Stephen in conversation with a greater conversation of artists from dating back from the 15th century up to the present time. All right, Stephen.
Someone just asked what the book is in the foreground, and can you repeat the title again?
Sure, sure. It's Kara Walker. It's called Freedom, a Fable. And it's from 1997. So if you Google that, you'll see. It was a limited edition work.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, so like we were talking about before, a lot of this work is about labor. And in the beginning, I spent a lot of time talking about when I was first began making artwork about slavery and enslaved labor. And so I wanted to take sort of a turn and talk about labor post-slavery, post the Civil War. And I also wanted to just talk about some successes and some failures. And like one of the first people that sort of came to mind was this man here. He is so famous and so beloved and so hated by so many people, Marcus Garvey. The thing about Marcus Garvey is like it can be challenging to sort of find like information about him, find accurate information, because like he has just been like deified and become a god. If you don't know his history, I would suggest a documentary that came on PBS, but just a brief background. From Jamaica, he came to America He started an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. And it was like this collection of Black businesses, especially in New York, just helping each other and working together. And the thing that sort of became a failure with it is like, there were successful organizations helping to fund some of the more poor organizations. And so with that sort of financial mixture, like some things just didn't work out. He also started something called the Black Star Line, which was a huge ship. And he was sold bad ships. He was viewed by the FBI and other organizations. And he eventually was arrested and put in jail for mail fraud. And so if we can just skip over, this is like one of the famous pictures you see of him, of this parade he did in Harlem, and sort of showy hat that he has. He's very Napoleonic. If you go to the next slide here, and this is Henrietta Vinton Davis. And she is one of the women in Philadelphia who helped start the Black Cross nurses. And so if we go to the next picture, we'll see some Black Cross nurses in a parade. And then I used all of this information, a lot of information, to come up with the piece, the Marcus Garvey painting, that is based off of an old painting called The Birth of the Flag. And this is by a painter called Henry Mosler. And this was sort of the blueprint to put all that information together in this quilt, so we can show the quilt of Marcus Garvey. So this is the quilt of Marcus Garvey. And when you look at it, you see the nurses that are the Black Cross nurses that we were talking about earlier. And you see the Pan-African flag. Marcus Garvey was one of the people who created the Pan-African flag. And right behind him, you see the Black Star Line, and you see people from overlooking the Black Star Line, looking at Marcus Garvey, making this quilt with these nurses. And originally, there was not the woman you see at the top behind him. Can you talk about some of the conversation that we had when I first showed you this sketch, Kilolo?
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We were just talking about the women that really influenced and shaped him. And he was married twice, and both of his wives were named Amy.
The same name.
Same name. So we were like, this is Amy, yeah. Stephen's like, yeah, I'm going to put Amy in this, centering her alongside Marcus Garvey with the nurses as these seamstress. I love these dualities that these manifestations of these different spirits that you weave into these stories, Stephen. And so I just thought it was so sublime that you did that.
Yeah, because like you had said before, like having originally without her, there is this triangle created, and he is at the top of the triangle. And so for so many people, like Marcus Garvey is a beloved person, but I think sometimes there are a lot of Black women that feel that his group and his past has been sometimes used to justify misogynistic behavior. And so I wanted to make sure that these women who were both important in helping him develop his organizations were sort of also centered in the painting. And she's not above that sort of showy flag because he was always at the top, but she is beside him. And when you see these works in person, this is about like 60 by 50, you're sort of looking into this giant window of Garvey. And again, it's just the successes and failures, and so many people behind this organization led to sort of what we have as like this whole Black national movement.
And I love these butterflies, Stephen. So the viewers, if you pay attention to some of the wildlife, the feathered friends that are very much present in Stephen's work.
Yeah, so you see that a lot. And one of the other things that sort of came to mind, we were just talking about sort of patriarchy, misogyny. like I had been listening to some podcasters, some YouTubers. For Harriet, there's one named Chrissy. Chrissy in particular talked about like seeing images of dark-skinned Black women in artwork, contemporary artwork. A lot of it is like Black women holding the fist up and sort of being the soldiers, and not enough pictures of Black people and dark-skinned Black women being loved. And I really wanted to show that in a quilt and painting. And so this next painting sort of came to mind. I had been listening to people like Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, who you'll see here. And then I came up with the idea of this quilt we have here, Dressing Up. And this is one of my favorite quilts, and sort of has a special place in my heart, because I wanted to show this Black woman, this dark-skinned Black woman, this dark-skinned Black woman with like a body, like most people, being loved and cared for by these Black men. And so I just wanted to create this sort of wispy image. I looked through lots of archived images of dresses at that time period, looked at hats. And when you see the actual piece at the museum, in the little box, you'll see one of the alternative hats that I created for this figure. And so for me, this is just like a figure of love. And I saw someone wrote in the comment about male seamstresses. I mean, a lot of tailors and seamstresses were male. And so I wanted to make sure that I included them in this piece. So they are taking care of her. They're showing their reverence for her, and making her feel really beautiful before she has a performance. Did you have anything you want to say about this?
Oh, no, I was just thinking about how you were sketching this and thinking through like your process of this work in particular, and just the different fabrics, the wallpaper in the background, which is exquisite, and that chandelier, and then the backdrop of the city. I mean, there's just so much rich texture and surface that you definitely are bringing together, and it's spectacular, Stephen.
Thank you.
And then even just like how you were switching out like the different types of fabric for the dress, because I remember you were like, oh, I really like the sequence, and how that was very much everything else kind of grew around that, and then even putting these lace gloves.
Yes.
Woo!
Those were sort of a last minute afterthought. And I have to say that the thing that's different with my quilts and my paintings is like I do my paintings. I don't have help with paintings. I don't know how to teach someone to paint like me. But with my quilts, I'm often able to have people help me. So in the beginning, I had a wonderful young artist named Hillary Cyrus work with me on quilts. And then for these quilts, I had two wonderful women, Ann Weaver and Christy Taylor, helped me on these quilts. And so like when you first saw them at Fallingwater, what you saw were sketches and me sort of working out some fabric patterns and pieces. And then sort of when I'm home and able to work with these people, we're able to sort of come up with the final piece. And a lot of this was just based off of antiques that I would find online and sort of figuring out what the colors are. And so like, I have an idea in my head, it may work, I may have to cut it out and redo it again, but this is sort of how it came out, and I'm really happy with how this piece came out and the tenderness in it.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And even like the necklace, because didn't you deconstruct a necklace and then restrand these I don't know if they're pearls or
yeah.
And then even like the pin cushions, the little detail on the end of the pen cushion, it just really pops. And seeing it in person, I encourage everybody to go see it at Westmoreland if you're able to. It is exquisite. It really is. And that shimmery, that illumination, Also from even the little rectangles of this light coming out of the buildings too. It's just the way in which you pull it all
Oh,
over together.
I did those individually. They were very much a pain to do. And also the necklace, I was gifted the pearls, as you know, when I was in Fallingwater. And so like part of like taking each of those apart and then reconstructing it. I remember doing that one night and thinking, am I crazy doing this?
You are.
But everything sort of came out the way I wanted it to. And I was definitely thinking of this person in this painting and showing her reverence too. So I just wanted to make it as beautiful as possible.
And you did that and more.
Thanks.
All right, shall we go to the next one?
Yeah. And as we mentioned, I spent some time at Fallingwater in Pennsylvania, Frank Lloyd Wright House. And Kilolo actually introduced me to the idea of making a work of art about Elsie Henderson and learning about Elsie Henderson. And Elsie Henderson was a cook and sort of the overall person that's to sort of watch the house at Fallingwater. She lived until she was 107. She was very much beloved by the Kaufmans who worked there, who own the home. Just learning about her history, learning about the history of Fallingwater was just an amazing thing for me. And so we were looking at different pictures. We couldn't find any pictures of her in Fallingwater. Back in the day, in her younger days, a lot of the pictures are her up at older, her holding cakes, her in the kitchen. And I sort of like was sort of going back and forth about like, how am I supposed to portray this woman? And she's also very secretive. And so it's like, well, how do I portray her in a way that's honorable? And who she is. And I never got to meet her in life because she passed. COVID sort of ruined that whole thing. And so we found this picture, this family photo, if you go to the next one.
And Stephen, we also got to see videos of her as an older woman, but she still was very vibrant and very fashionable, right? These images and these videos that we saw of her, she may have had a walker, but then when they were playing music, she would leave her walker and she'd start dancing and tapping her feet, her little kitten heels. And so through some of those images and video, and then seeing this image that you're going to talk about, this is the switch that I thought was just so brilliant.
Yeah, and I had mentioned in the previous talk that a lot what had inspired me with this painting was a book by Joan Didion, and she talked about after her husband died, when she looked in the mirror, she realized how much she had aged. Like sometimes time doesn't exist in your head. Sometimes time doesn't exist. Your body will tell you how old you are physically, but in your mind, you're sort of a different age. And so I wanted to emanate that spirit with Elsie in this next painting you see here.
Boom.
So that's Elsie. We talked about her love of flowers. We talked about that red color that is sort of the color of Fallingwater. And again, like the spirit of Elsie, who she was. And like with previous works, I made sure to look up a lot of archival images of clothing at that time period. This is actually called a play suit. And so I looked at vintage play suits and had a color swab of colors and patterns that were used at that time period. And I used that to sort of make this piece. You want to talk about, do you have anything to sort of
I love
the chair. Talk about what you mentioned.
So like I had to just scroll back to this black and white because Stephen often looks at these vintage black and white or sepia images, and you say you breathe life into the works that you paint or stitch together. And so for you to be like, okay, this play suit is going to be this purple and white pinstripe. And I was like, ooh, okay. And then even just how this vibrancy of her, and you're showing the innerhood of Elsie, and that, you didn't have to show the water, but you know that her proximity to the water, she could be right by the pool. And then even how you brought in the Fallingwater red to the cushion of the chase, but then also the chair to your left is like she's inviting someone, she's inviting us to come sit with her and talk with her. And so I feel like I can easily enter this beautiful painting that you've created of Elsie, and it's just a beautiful tribute.
Yeah, and a lot of times we were talking about it. So I mean, before I used to try and paint in a realistic style, and now I've sort of like given to the idea of painting. And some of my favorite painters are like Marie Cassatt. But a lot of times when making this work, I was looking at people like Monet and Cezanne, and just like looking at the brushstroke. And I wanted to make sure that I did that when I was creating these sort of atmospheric paintings, especially from black and white photos.
And then even some of the flowers, because I had asked you, like, what flowers did you want to name in these paintings? Because I know you love flowers, and your visits to Pittsburgh and to Fallingwater and Greensburg, especially in the spring and summer and fall times, you'd always stop and smell a flower or a tree.
Yes,
I
yes.
just always loved it. And I captured some of those images too of you doing that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
like I looked at like the yellow bushes, St. John's wort. The pink ones are like these roses that you see blooming off of fences a lot of times in spring and summer. And so I incorporated those in a lot of the paintings actually. So you'll see flowers in a lot of the paintings. And the other thing, I don't think I mentioned this, like in a lot of my work, some of the main elements you see are like metal or sparkly reflective material. And I say that sort of is like how I see God is sort of like reflective and emanating everywhere. And you'll see either like butterflies or animals, and they sort of represent spirits. So sometimes a person is surrounded by them, sometimes a person is looking at them, sometimes it's behind them and they don't know they are. But a lot of it is about God and spirit. And because in a lot of these paintings, I'm painting people that may be alive or not alive, I'm sort of trying to sort of put myself in the mind of that person. And like we talked before in our discussions, like there's a conversation between me, the person being photographed, and the photographer. And then there's sort of like this merging that comes together, and that's how the works are made. And I hope that I do these people justice. This has been like one of the most challenging exhibitions and bodies of work that I've worked on. But like every morning, like right before I started working on the work, I would always sort of pray to God and the ancestors that I do these people justice.
Also, I wanted to call attention to the butterflies, and you tend to have like three, that the number of three. And I think about like the Trinity, the divinity, the divine. I've noticed that in your paintings, I tend to try to count the butterflies or the birds in your work and see where they're situated too, where they're resting.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's exactly it, like the God, the Father, and the Holy Spirit. And that's also why I include, like we were talking about, a lot of triangles. And if you look at this work, the photograph was a triangle. And so I tried to emphasize that triangle with the bottom of her feet to the tip of the rose bush to sort of the bottom portion of the seat.
Yeah. Great. So the man here.
Yeah, so you also introduced me to Teenie Harris, and Teenie Harris documented Black life in Pittsburgh, and now his archive, he's since passed, and now his archives are with the Carnegie Museum. And you introduced me to his work, and it was like I I had no idea. Like some of these images are familiar, and sometimes they're not necessarily attributed to the person. And so learning about Teenie Harris, learning about the images that he created, like how much history he documented, it was amazing to me. And so I wanted to use some of the workers that he documented in paintings. And one of the things was to paint him. And when we talked about how there are numerous pictures of Teenie, but this is one that doesn't come up very often. And for me, it was just, I fell in love with this photograph when I first saw it. I love the little white poofy dog, the Samoyed, I think the breed is called.
Yes.
And just the look of his eyebrows and how he's looking at you. And I know he probably doesn't realize somebody spent so much time looking at his eyebrows, but I wanted to make sure that I capture this image as beautifully as I could, to capture how beautifully he photographs people.
And Stephen, with Teenie's archive, there's over 80,000 images in the archive and counting. And so we tend to see Teenie working. So he's behind the lens, he's behind the camera, or there might be, one of his head portraits in his studio. And so he's always like working. So to see him just leisurely sitting with his dog on this chair, once again, I love how you're bringing, what his interior self out and painting that.
So this is the painting. And again, a lot of this was looking at vintage wallpapers, trying to see if there were images of like what the colors are of these vintage wallpapers, looking at vintage lamps, vintage furniture, more easy to find, and using vintage suits, vintage socks. Like those socks were actually socks that I found in an old ad from the 1960s. And so just incorporating all of those things into the work. Teenie was a sharp man. He was always working in from what I understand, how people described him, very put together. And so I wanted to make sure that I show that in this image. And the tenderness between him and the dog in this painting.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. All right.
And these are just some of his photographs, some of them that I used for paintings. This one I used for a painting called Sisterhood. We were actually looking at this photo. So we went to the Carnegie, got permission to use these images and paintings. Talked to Charlene, who runs the archive at Carnegie. Learned so much from her. And we were also looking at some of the descriptors and the pictures to figure out what's going on. I don't think I mentioned that before, but when you're going through these archives, like a lot of the archives I went through were in South Carolina, West Virginia, and of course, the Carnegie with Teenie Harris, you have these descriptors, and sometimes the descriptors tell you what's happening, and sometimes they're sort of vague. It's sort of like when we go through an old family photo album, especially after someone's passed, and you're like, well, who is that? And nobody knows. So when we were talking about Charlene would go into neighborhoods where Teenie took photographs and sort of have these groups where people would look at photographs and try to figure out exactly what that place is, or if somebody knows who that person is in the picture, like try and reach out to that person's family to figure out what's going on in that photo. And we don't really know what's going on in this photo. When you sort of go in and out, you see this Red Cross sign. So we were figuring out that maybe it could have been a volunteering for Red Cross, but we don't know. But I turned it into this painting called Sisterhood.
And once again, I mean, these threads that you're weaving through this show, of Marcus Garvey and the Black nurses. And then you have these nurses here. And also there's these yellows too, because even with Teenie, and then how you put this polka dotted yellow dress, you painted this woman. And then there's like this other painting that you did by Teenie with the young woman, the young girl who's a student. So I pay attention to those details, Stephen.
Yeah, I was actually, my husband is very much into fashion, and we were looking at vintage dresses. And the one thing he sort of mentioned is like this pale yellow, this canary yellow that's used a lot in these in dresses. And so I was just like on this whole canary yellow dress sort of binge, just deep dive, trying to find all of these vintage dresses. And so I would use those to sort of create the images here. So her dress is very dark in the photo, but I wanted to sort of show the brightness of this image. And one of the things that we talked about is like, the thing that drew me to this image was like the different facets of the women. Like they were all, it was very much about empowerment, because you have two people in slacks, you have three people in dresses, and just like the tenderness and the sisterhood amongst them was, it drew me. And that big American flag. So in a lot of the paintings, I've been using the American flag because like for Black people, if you go through a neighborhood and you see a bunch of American flags, like it has been weaponized. It's like it's dangerous. And so a lot of the work in this show is about me embracing it and embracing the Americanness of me and who I am. Sort of a take back of the flag and say, this flag belongs to me too.
Absolutely. And I love how these women, just like how Teenie, this is something that we learned with Teenie, and doing his photographs, he would literally dodge and burn to show the different skin tones of the women. And you also do that in your work as well, Stephen.
Yeah, a lot of it was like looking at myself in the mirror, looking at people that I know, and just looking at different color photographs of people and trying to play around with those skin tones. And it's challenging. Sometimes some things are more successful than others, but I do the best that I can.
And you did the same thing with Teenie and capturing his skin tone as well.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a coal miner photograph that Teenie took.
Someone said they're not seeing the image. Is everyone seeing the image now?
Is everybody seeing the image?
I think we see it now. Yeah, we're all seeing it. Everybody sees it. Yeah.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. Thank you.
So like one of the first jobs that we talked about, the very first job was coal miners. I knew nothing about coal miners. I'm from South Carolina. I mean, a lot of the things I learned about was agriculture. And so since we were doing the show in Pennsylvania, I wanted to make sure that we studied coal mining. And so I got to learn about the history of coal mining, especially in Pennsylvania and Appalachia, and how these coal mining towns are sort of mirrors to like the sort of modern American economic system. You have these people who were split up, like they were literal coal mining towns, and people were housed in different sections based off of their ethnicity. There were like a section for Blacks, Italians, white Anglo-Saxons. And when people are going into the coal mines, like they're all dirty, you are covered in the soot. But as soon as you sort of come out and wash the soot off, you are sort of split into these different factions. And just there are a lot of people that I didn't know about, like Mother Jones, who is important in creating unions, and just her whole story. She grew up poor in Ireland, came to America. Her husband and her children, like everybody in her life, died. And she devoted herself after that to help coal miners gain rights. And so I wanted to sort of do a series of works honoring coal miners. And part of it was going into these archival images and using the people in these images to create these 6 paintings that we're about to see.
And these images you were looking at the West Virginia, right? University,
Yeah.
or their historical society,
Mhm.
their archival images.
And these are 3 of the paintings. And these are really mixed media works. So the foreground is painted, and in the paint, I've mixed in mica flakes, which is sort of a rock material, a sparkly rock material. I've also mixed in glitter in the background, sort of to give that look of coal. The flag is just painted onto the wood. The faces are painted, and the clothes are actually fabric. And with the fabric, I sewed the fabric on my sewing machine, pieced it all together, and then I used pencil and graphite to sort of make it dirty and murky. And then the hat is actual fabric too. And then the hat, the lanterns that are on top of their hats, that's paper, and I've incorporated metal leaf on it. And each of them have these paintings of canaries around them. And like the butterflies, the canary sort of represents spirituality. There's that whole idea of the canary in the coal mine. And canaries were used in coal mines in the beginning to warn coal miners of poisonous gases that could kill them. And so you have these canaries in these 6 paintings sort of overlooking these people and protecting them. And I think you have them beautifully arranged when you see them in the exhibition. And there's a lot of things that don't translate well to photographs. So whenever you see them in person, a lot of the stuff I say will make sense.
Definitely. And Stephen, you do a lot of thrifting and going to vintage stores, but also some of the time that I spent with you was just going and, seeing how you visualize and capture different objects and do little sketches or take photographs. And in Baltimore, and then also in Pittsburgh, we went to the Rivers of Steel Museum, and they had different apparel for coal miners and steel workers, and that just seeing all of that through your eyes and listening to you talk about that, and then also seeing those works in the museum, and then getting to hear some of the visitors talk about, oh my gosh, my grandfather or my great uncle, or that looks like my grandfather. It's just really endearing and powerful to hear people, respond so enthusiastically from your work.
Yeah, like our last day there was a couple that came. The museum was closed, and then Anne ran out and said, come and see. And just hearing from them about how much the work was powerful to them. Their family owned coal miners, they weren't the vicious coal miners that some of the ones that we talked about before, but she said these works really resonated to her when she would see people coming out of the mines, like this is sort of how they looked. And like you said, that was sort of really affirming, like that people actually see this and feel this when they see the work in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're just wrapping up, and we just wanted to thank everybody for joining this portion of this presentation. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we're going to take some questions and comments. Thanks, Erica.
Yes, absolutely. And along the lines of what you were just saying, we have Tamara Coleman from Alexandria, Virginia, who was commenting that she's a native of Pittsburgh. Her mother is a self-taught quilter, and her grandfather was a coal miner in Marianna, Pennsylvania. So really just wonderful comments and reactions to that last series that was shared. Just as you were saying, how wonderful it is when people come to the museum and see those and can really have a personal connection to them. And I know personally, I had seen the Pioneer images of it first before seeing it in person, and I loved just seeing the image of it. And when I did see it in person, and I encourage all of you to come to the exhibition to see it, just the texture and the light on it and just all the mixed media of it, it just took my breath away when I saw it in person for the first time. So just really,
America, the Pioneer, the Westmoreland Museum purchased that. So for those who live near, we have a piece of Stephen nearby. And then we have other people who have purchased work locally that we hopefully will be able to visit. So I'm just so thrilled that, the Pioneer is at the Westmoreland Museum of Art, and I can go visit it as much as I'd like whenever I want to.
Yes.
So Mike had a really interesting question, and he wrote, how do you decide to do a painting or a quilt?
I think it's just sort of the idea. Some things lend themselves more to quilts than paintings. My first painting that was in the slide Birth of a Nation, I often talk about how that was my first quilt because I tried painting it and drawing it, but it wasn't working. And so I realized that I had to sew it because I was going around looking for flags that I could sort of paint on, and there were none available. Definitely not Betsy Ross flags. And so I had to quilt it, and I watched YouTube videos to learn how to quilt it, and then it sort of happened. And sort of a practical thing is like I can, because I have sort of a small workspace, I can only work on one thing at a time. So I can either work on painting or quilting. I work on multiple paintings and multiple quilts. But when I'm working on a group of quilts, I'm just working on those. When I'm working on paintings, I'm just working on those because I don't want a paint to get on a quilt and sort of ruin it. But that's sort of how it works.
Great. Well, Nadia writes, Stephen, I would love to know more about the works Carolina Gold, On the Hill, etc. Is there a shared theme with some of the works which look like they're based in fields? I wonder if it was inspired by the landscapes from the South.
Yes, so those were actually from archived photos in South Carolina. I reached out to the organization that actually owned the archives to see if I can make works out them. And they were from a farm called the Donner Farm. And the Donner Farm, the Donners moved to that area because they were wanted to mine phosphate, but couldn't mine phosphate there. And I think they grew asparagus and potatoes there. And so those young men that you see in those paintings, and the men that you see in those paintings were workers in the fields at that time period. And because this is post-Civil War, they are laborers, they're not enslaved people, but sort of like, I mean, you have to sort of think of that time period. What else could you do? And you were always sort of working to live, and you could never make enough money to sort of escape out of a situation. So that's why a lot of people just ran up north. That's why I'm in Baltimore. I ran up north because I couldn't find work in South Carolina.
Tamara has a sort of a practical question. Can you recommend what to do with their mother's quilting machines and thousands of fabrics?
I would say donate them. There are organizations. If you are in Pittsburgh, what's the name of that place in Pittsburgh, Kilolo, that you told me by the frick? I've been there.
Oh, the Center for Creative Reuse, Pittsburgh Center for Creative Reuse, yes.
Center for Creative Reuse. Yeah, there are places like that around town. I know that for people like me, it's very important that I find these sort of vintage quilts and machines because without them, then I wouldn't have a lot of the fabrics that I have. And the thing is that people that make quilts, we tend to sort of hoard and have our stash, but when it's time to release them, it's time to release them. I often get quilts and materials from people who have passed, and when I get that, I sort of say a little prayer over that thing, because the person didn't realize when they bought that in 1960 that they were buying it for me. And so I would say, keep the quilts for your family, but I would say donate them and give them to someone that can use them, the materials and the actual the sewing machine, or sell them on Etsy.
Even with I Am the Glory, that quilt is a real quilt. That's your husband Jermaine's quilt that he was gifted, right?
He
By
was
his
gifted
aunt.
by his aunt, who made it in high school. So yeah.
We have a comment and question from Alicia. It says, I can't wait to see and study these beautiful works. The textures, representation, beauty, and skill are all remarkable. Have you ever pursued using your eye to enter the advertisement world?
Well, my husband is a graphic designer, and he helps me a lot with my own advertising of my work and who I am. I think just sort of as an artist, I'm one of those artists that like pretty things and that like to show people pretty things. And so that's sort of how I view my artwork. I want, even if nobody knows the story about Declaration and Resistance, I want them to go in there and say, wow, that was such a beautiful show. That was a great experience.
So I think we have time for one more question. And Helen writes, and I believe Helen may have come and seen the show, because she writes, can you tell us anything about the quilt called The Fisherman?
So I often do paintings of fishermen because I come from Charleston, a little town called Lincolnville, South Carolina, but it's not too far from Charleston. And I remember as a child fishing and crabbing. I remember crabbing in the rain and pulling up crabs. And so that sort of memory that I have, the smell of being by the swamps and that sort of murky water, is sort of why it reoccurs in my quilts. And when I'm making works like The Fisherman, I knew people that fish, I knew people that were shrimpers. And so that's a lot of hard work to feed us. And so that's why I often do those works about fishermen and crabbers.
Even like how you the the representation of like that net and casting the net, and then like how the sun or the moon and the moonlight is almost like that the rays of the moonlight coming in. I mean, that's just all how you know your composition and everything, Stephen, is you just want to sit with the painting or the quilt, and just it's just so mesmerizing. Erica, somebody did have a question about how did you decide? I know there's so many questions, comments, but I think Mike asked about how do you decide which one to make a painting over a quilt or vice versa? How do you make that decision on what to paint and make it a quilt or a painting?
That's really difficult to answer. Like the subject or the person sort of tells me in my head that this needs to be a painting or a quilt. Sometimes I just have like a bunch of ideas in my head, and when I have that idea, like it's a quilt, I know it's a quilt or a painting. Just my mind tells me. I have some stuff that's going on in my mind right now, and I know they're quilts. I just know that they are. It's kind of hard to answer. It's just intuition.
And I think a really nice way to wrap up this discussion is a question by Tamara, which is, who is a quilter that you admire?
I think like the G's Bin Quilters, definitely check out their work if you haven't seen some of their work. Faith Ringgold, and her paintings and quilts, like the mixture of them too. And just local people, like it's not really sort of like famous people, but when you meet quilters and you see how generous they are with their time and with their effort and with their knowledge, like it's just it's a great experience. The African American quilters have been here in Baltimore, have been doing a project with the Maryland Institute, which is a college here. And just when I was working there before COVID, I was able to go to some of their meetings and look at some of the projects they were doing, and just like the who they were and who they are and their spirit are inspirational to me.
Yeah, there's so many questions and comments which are just amazing. And Stephen, you are phenomenal. And there's just so much to see at Declaration and Resistance. I mean, somebody mentioned the timeline. I mean, there's just so much. And we have a catalog that will be published soon. And there's also wonderful merchandise, from puzzles to magnets to a beautiful tray with the bakers. There's just so much to see and enjoy, and just get lost in the richness of Stephen's work. And your talents are just totally, I just use the word sublime, Stephen, because you have no idea how fortifying it was to work with you on this. And also somebody coming from the South, me being from Mississippi, and how you brought in those clay, that red clay. And I'm like, yes, I know what you're talking about. There's just so much there. So thank you so much. And I know Ann Craybill's here. And thank you, Ann, for all that you've done to steward and bring Stephen's work to Greensburg. I just thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you both so much for this amazing exhibition, for this wonderful conversation. And thank you to all who have joined us this evening. This program will be available on the Westmoreland's YouTube channel. And also you can check out another conversation from last summer that was filmed with Stephen and Kilolo at Fallingwater when Stephen had his residency there. So please check out that video. It's on our YouTube channel as well. And I really want to encourage all of our viewers to visit the museum to see these incredible exhibitions, Stephen Towns' Declaration and Resistance and End of an Illusion. And both exhibitions will be up until May 8th. We also have some exciting programming for these exhibitions, including on April 21st, when the Westmoreland will host in person and virtually an evening with Erica Armstrong Dunbar, who will be discussing her award-winning book, Never Caught: The Washington's Relentless Pursuit of Their Runaway Slave, Ona Judge, which is a subject of 2 of Stephen's quilts in the exhibition, and the April 23rd Declaration and Resistance Dinner that is curated by James Beard Award winner Alexander Smalls and catered by Jackie Page of Love Rocks Cafe. So please be sure to check out these and our other upcoming programming on our website, thewestmoreland.org, and by following us on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.